Then we'd get it back a few days later, and the edit itself, the picture edit, had completely changed shape. And sometimes in the middle of an action sequence, which made it extremely difficult. So suddenly you got pieces that were here that are moved over there and shortened and this and that. And then our job becomes, well, how do we now make a musical piece out of this that the orchestra can actually play coherently?
David Doss, how you been?
I've been great. So good to be here with you after the stuff that we've done together and the stuff that we've done individually. It's going to be great. It's going to be great. Looking forward to chatting with you.
Yeah. Thanks for coming out and hanging with us. And how's LA?
Well, LA's been through its own kind of weird season of its own, with the fires, which really they didn't affect me directly, but they affected so many people in my orbit, and the whole city was kind of in a state of shock for a good couple months, and now rebuilding a bit at a time. It's a weird time, and creatively speaking, it's been a weird time with all the changes in technology and the trends, the streaming, the AI, all that stuff. It's a kind of an uncertain time for creatives, but every time is an uncertain time in its own way. So as creators, we've got to figure our way out of that and figure out how to push forward and how to succeed.
Yeah, man. So before we get into it, I'm just curious, what's kind of, you were talking a little bit about it, but what is the vibe out there? Like, what's the kind of like, what's everybody thinking right now in Los Angeles? Is a lot of people still thinking about moving out? What's going on?
It's hard to say definitively. There's always been a stream of a California exodus, and there's always been a stream of a California, whatever the opposite is, exodus, right? People who want to realize their dreams and move to the big city and make it happen. And then there's enough people who are tired of it or have been affected by all the things that go on here and no longer want to be here. I get it. It's hard to measure which one is greater at any given time. I will say it's just been a very uncertain time because with all the trends in the industry, it's harder than ever to make a living at what we love doing. Whether you're, on the filmmaker side, if you're in post, if you're a composer, as I am, like it's a bit uncertain how we push forward and actually find successful projects. Everybody has a different answer to that, so there is no one form answer. But it tests all of our resolve. So, some people do say, I would rather pursue my dreams elsewhere. And some people are like, I'm sticking it out here. So it is what it is.
We're going, I don't know how far back, but tell us how you got into film composing.
Well, my life
from the time I was just the other day, right? 10 years ago, 12.
Yeah. So I just picked up this used laptop on the side of the road, and that's kind of how it started. No. For me, my life went through several different chapters. I grew up born to be a musician, playing instruments from a young age. I grew up on pop and jazz, and then in my teens, I got into classical music. I got a degree in classical music. I have a degree in classical piano. And then after I graduated, I moved to Nashville and I got a job on the road touring. So then I'm doing pop and stuff. And then I moved more into production because I realized I loved the near infinite process of nudging pixels around a screen until I could get it sounding exactly the way I wanted it to. And I realized I preferred that process rather than playing live where everything is in the moment and it has to be perfect in the moment. I like polishing things and spending hours until it's right. So I moved more into music production at that point, recording and production. And then I was doing a little bit of work in sound design for a company out here in LA, and they made an overture to me and they said, hey, we really like working with you. Would you ever consider moving out here? And I was kind of like, you know what? Yeah, I'm ready for a new adventure. Let's do it. So I moved out to LA in 2005. And from the moment I landed in LA, that's where every strand of every type of music I had done before that kind of came together, because I quickly fell in love with writing to film, writing to picture. Because, when you're working in other kinds of music, like, for example, you're a keyboard player or a record producer, your goal is to play or produce that perfect song for the artist, or maybe you're the artist, and, that's the end goal. But in film and television and similar media and games, like the goal is so much bigger. It's a multifaceted amalgamation of all the different crafts, the acting, the directing, the lighting, the photography, everything about it. And I loved kind of using all my musical skills to figure out, hey, what is this scene? What does this project need to come alive? Which, in every project I do is a completely different beast. But I love being in the studio and trying to solve that problem and then making the picture come alive and being part of this much bigger organism, as opposed to making records. I still make records and I still enjoy doing that. But really, like, I think I discovered my passion once I arrived here in LA is I love writing the picture.
It's interesting you say that, because I know it's kind of similar for Nathan as well as myself. We almost get inspired by the scores and the music that we hear. It almost paints a picture for us. And it seems like for you, when you see that picture, it inspires your ears, right? It inspires the score within you to come out. Is that kind of the case?
That is exactly right. I get inspired by all the other art forms. And it is actually the reason I love living in Los Angeles, because all of my buddies are different facets of this industry. They're doing parallel things to me, but in their own way. So I learn from my writers and my editors and my producers and my directors and my actors, because they're all pursuing their version of what I love to pursue. So yeah, I get inspired by everything else. In fact, I mean, I don't want to say like I'm never inspired by music. I am. I have lots of music that I love to listen to, but because my job is making music, like that's my passion. And then my inspirations are often from outside that.
Right.
I totally understand that for sure.
So I would say you moved to Los Angeles in 2005, very 2 or 3 years. You met Derek Gates, and a film I happened to be in was, I guess Crook was the first project you worked with Derek, and that's kind of how I got to know you a little bit, right?
And I think too that I could say that in my years of public life that I welcome this kind of examination, because people have got to know whether or not they're presidents of crook. Well, I'm not a crook.
Yeah, that was a really nice fortuitous meeting of the minds, Derek and Brent and that whole team. Yeah, it was a massively creative time when we were all just kind of messing around with shorter form stuff, but getting our beaks wet, and yeah, it was awesome. Crook was a really fun project. In fact, okay, this is slightly tangential, but I think it's a worthwhile story. When we were filming Crook, because Derek brought me in kind of early, I was young and new in LA. I was like, I want to see every part of this. So I visited you guys while you were filming it. And while I was just hanging out, really kind of brand new to the whole process, I met the DP on that project. And he chatted me up and he was like, you know what, I got a little project, if you want to work with me on, I'd love some music for it. And that project ended up being really instructive for me, because it was a historical documentary. And he said, well, first of all, he just laid it in front of me and he said, I'm going to do a historical documentary. And I thought to myself privately, oh my gosh, this is the culmination of everything I've ever wanted to do. I'm going to do a big orchestra, a huge this, a huge that. It's going to be like my magnum opus. It's my Mr. Holland's opus, right? And when he sent me picture, I started writing the first versions of it. And everything I wrote, he did not like. He hated it and he kept rejecting it. And I was like, man, what is wrong with me that I can't get this? And eventually I got to the point where I was like, just show me something like what you really want, which, now we know we would call this a temp score, right? Regardless of whether he actually temped it into the edit. And he said, I just want this. And I listened to his example, and it was a low rumbling synth pad and like holding one note. And it was a high solo violin playing a very simple melody. And I said, that's all you want? And he said, that's all I want. And as soon as I tried that, instantly, like this beautiful historical landscape, all the vistas, they started to come alive. And I was like, oh, that's what film scoring is about. It's like choosing the right tool, the right moment, the right instruments. I mean, yes, we have to get to that point, but it's like, if you think about it, like if you have a sonic soundscape from 0 to 100, you can fill that 0 to 100 with a full orchestra or a rock band, or you can fill it with a tiny violin and just turn it way up. It'll still fill the space. You're just filling that space with completely different things that have completely different emotional results. So I realized that in his project, I could fill that space with those two instruments, the low pad and the high violin, and that's all it needed. Everything else was just space, and that film needed space. I learned my lesson quick. I was like, oh, okay. My job is to make this come alive, not to do my magnum opus, but to figure out what this scene or this project needs and then fill it with that.
Yeah. Man, the violin, what a great instrument. You can go from so many different moods and character arcs. Everything is just built into such a great mood with the violin. It's one of my favorite instruments. It really is.
Yeah, yeah. It can be. And it's all in how you use it, because it can do 100 different things. Like in my example, it was just doing slow, lilting things in a specific mode that suggested the historical period. You know, but you can have it do it. You can have it do a hoedown. You can have it do Star Wars. You can do all kinds of things with it. It just kind of depends what the project is and what it needs.
Have you ever heard that joke, David? What's the difference between a fiddle and a violin?
Go ahead. Tell me the answer.
Yeah, one of them's had beer spilt on it. That'd be the fiddle, right? So it's interesting you say that. It is a versatile instrument. You know, I want to ask you. You're talking about these orchestral pieces and things like that. Are you as a composer? Do you rely on a library that already exists? Do you draw from different ones, or do you create your own libraries? Is there any instance where you're sampling these instruments and kind of creating something that's uniquely yours? How much of a mix is there to external libraries and internal libraries?
A bit of both, all of the above and more. You know, from the composer nerd perspective, like my dream is always to work with a real orchestra, because a real orchestra will breathe life into a score in a way that a computerized, a sampled orchestra usually can't, or can only get to a certain point. But in this day and age, virtually all scores start as sampled orchestras. So I am using orchestras that have been created by there's a lot of major manufacturers out there that make them. So I have a lot of those. I use a lot of those. Sometimes I can create my own as well. Typically not full orchestra, because that's cost prohibitive. It's much easier to buy a sampled orchestra for a few $100, several $100, $1,000 than it is to make my own version of that. But that said, sampled orchestras have been getting better and better and better. And there are certain cases in which composers can use them where they're sometimes indistinguishable from the real thing. So they go a long way. And of course, you can combine them with non-orchestral elements too. That happens a lot. I think you find nowadays, now that this is a very mature technology, that people are also looking for weird things they haven't heard before. You know, Hans Zimmer will release a sample library of like 78 tubas or something. 78 tubas is not something you would ever do in the real world. But it has a very unique sound that, fair enough, has not been heard before. And going back to my historical drama example, if that's the sound that The Dark Knight needs, then that's the sound the composer should strive for. So, I kind of roundabout answered your question, but yeah, I use a lot of pre-made, sampled professional orchestras. I love playing with live orchestra whenever there's a budget to do it, and I'll often also combine that with other elements, sometimes non-orchestral or sometimes completely custom.
Your next couple of jobs, that time where you worked on Traffic and or Trafficked, and then The Appearing, right?
Right. Trafficked was it's a drama about human trafficking based on true stories. The Appearing was a horror thriller, sci thriller kind of thing. Both feature films, both tremendous fun. I'm not that much of a horror person personally, but once I kind of dove into it and I figured out what that needed, that was
Yep.
That was so much fun to do. It paved the way for stuff I would do later too, even though, like I said, I'm not super into horror myself. But Trafficked, I love dealing with, like, because that's obviously a real life issue that's going on. It's a very serious societal issue, and to bring that to life through music, that was really pretty impactful. Love that project.
Can you talk about some of your decision making, depending on genre? Maybe go into that a little bit. With a topic like Trafficked, I'm sure there was a lot of in-depth acting and a lot of emotion going on there. How do you internalize the balancing of a score to what you're seeing on screen and make it make sense together, right? Because like you were saying earlier, sometimes you only need two stems, two instruments to get your point across. When you're dealing with a story like that, how do you decide, when do I need to add more? When do I need to take some away?
Yeah, I don't know that there is like one stock answer to that, because that's partially it's a conversation with the director when we do a spotting session and we decide where music is going to go and where it's not. Because honestly, sometimes silence can be more powerful than music. So those are kind of judicious decisions that want to be made carefully. When the director and I decide that a certain scene needs this kind of music to either make us feel that emotion or to carry us forward into what's coming, or to divert us and not, give away the secret of what's coming, then I'll just spend hours here in my studio and try stuff. For me, composing is so much a process of exploration. And we have a we have a saying, like, it comes from the record industry, but you really don't want to know how the sausage is made, because it's not as glorious as you think it is. And watching someone like me work is the process of watching me try 100 things until I discover the one thing that works. And I mean, the more experienced I get, the faster I can figure out the thing that's going to work. But there's always that process of discovery. So, I mean, that's another reason I love working in a creative team, because in a dialogue with a director and other filmmakers, like, we can explore this stuff together. Sometimes we use temp scores to do that. I don't mind doing that at all. If you just handed me a scene and say, write some music to it, well, I could write 100 different things. I could write fast-paced stuff, slow-paced stuff, traditional, cutting edge, electronic. Like, there's so many options. But when we grab a temp score, at least we're like eliminating part of the conversation. We're saying, hey, we want something in this kind of style and this kind of framing. So at least we don't waste our time chasing 900 other tales. We can just focus on, a good starting point that we all agree something like this is going to work for the scene. So I like working with temp music. Obviously, I try not to listen to it too much, because I don't want to trick myself into just writing a version of the temp. I try and do something original, something with a fresh voice every time I write. But it is useful as a tool, like early in the production process.
So would you say you prefer that? Because I know when we worked together, we had a couple spotting sessions. I've worked with a few other composers as well, and some like it and some don't. Do you prefer it or do you not?
Generally, I prefer it, mostly because it's expedient. Like, it just gets us to the point faster, as long as we're all on the understanding that we're not just making a copy of the temp, which is something I try and clarify, like, early in the relationship, early in the working process. I don't mind the temp. Please, I know you need, as a filmmaker, you need to stick some stuff in there just to give your rough cut some continuity and to get an idea of what's working. The thing I value the most is watching the temp with the director and saying, hey, I like this about the temp. Maybe the pacing is right, but maybe the instrumentation is wrong, or maybe the instrumentation is right, but the pacing is wrong. Maybe this works, but it's a little bit too slow and plodding. But still, we could use that as a starting point and then write something that moves along a little faster. So for me, it's a practical way of getting to the point, faster. So I don't mind it at all, as long as I'm not in a place where I have to copy it.
Right. So you've done a lot of TV though, right? Can you talk to us about a little bit of your TV work, and then what do you prefer more, films or TV?
I have no preference. I love both. I mean, they're slightly different structurally, but it's really the same concept of storytelling over time. It's either over episodes or it's over, a couple hour arc. I did a TV series called Rhett and Link's Buddy System, which is a comedy. It's almost a dry slapstick kind of thing, which was really, really fun.
What is it? And after that, I headed into the kitchen to get myself some coffee. And there was this guy at the door that I talked to for a second.
Wait, a guy?
Yeah, a guy trying to get me to join some group. Kind of seemed like a cult.
Again, like comedy is not something that uses all my muscles. Sometimes all we need is like the pitter patter of a drum beat, kind of something to build anticipation for a punchline or a punch moment kind of thing. Again, I'm not pulling out the full orchestra for that. But I love working both. I love working with any kind of visual storytelling at this point. That's the fun thing.
What was the most memorable commercial you've done? Can you and what was the one? Can you say like, oh man, this was a big challenge? Commercials are tough. They're not easy.
They can be, if only because I nowadays I call it the TikTok syndrome. Before it used to be the commercial syndrome, meaning you've really got to grab the listener in the first couple of seconds, right?
Yep.
So, I mean, in commercials, that's largely done through the visuals and through whatever we're trying to sell. But even musically, it's really important on TikTok too, because that's the way media is moving. I happen to think TikTok is a huge glimpse into the future of instant media kind of thing. So, yeah, you've got to do something in the first seconds that are going to grab the attention of the person you're trying to engage. Yeah, back in the day, back in the the 60s or the 70s, when people were writing pop songs, there was a saying, "Don't bore us, get to the chorus," meaning every song has an intro and maybe has a verse, and then you want to get to the chorus because that's where the payoff, that's where the big hook is. Now, in the olden days, they might have given you 30 or 40 or 60 seconds to get there. But in the TikTok era, they give you like 2 seconds to get there, because if you don't engage right off the bat, the user will swipe and on to the next thing. So that's why I say I think TikTok is doing interesting things to our society as media consumers that eventually is going to be fully reflected in television and film. It's going to be much more, whatever you want to call it, like a really quick hook. People are going to expect that kind of immediacy, and it's going to cut the chaff out. Like, you won't have minutes and hours to unfold a long punchline or a long story. It'll be like people just want to get it now.
I've noticed that with a lot of commercials during like the Super Bowl, right? I think maybe it was Lowe's. There was one of those where it's like ding dong. It's just a little, whole step or whatever it is, but it almost sounds like a doorbell going off right before the commercial starts. And I'm starting to hear that more and more and more. It's almost like a visual or an audible cue that you need to like pay attention and look to where the source is. And I wonder how much psychology plays into that, because obviously psychology and music go hand in hand since, the beginning of time, but how much of that is becoming granular to where every little detail in not only the visuals but the audio is coming in to create that hook like you're talking about, right? Because after a while, how many hooks can you figure out before we all get used to those, and we need some new ones? There's only so much,
Yeah.
Like if you want to appeal to kids, you got to just turn the hertz up like all the way just so they can only hear it. The parents can't, like what's next, you got to ask yourself.
Yeah. I mean, that's like asking what comes after TikTok at the point we're recording this industry. I don't know. I think we're still at the point where TikTok takes over everything, and then YouTube and Instagram just copy it. And I don't know what happens after that. Will society slow down and get used to longer form storytelling? It's hard to see it, but who knows?
I still got to hold on to hope that we can still keep our long form, I mean,
I think we will.
At least stay horizontal. At least stay horizontal,
I think we will. Books have existed for centuries. Films have become the more modern day version of books because they're now a visual way of telling a longer form story, and TV from that being an episodic version of that. I think there'll always be place for that, but it will morph over time, and styles will change, of course.
Well, I guess moving on to what would you say, the 2016, 17 or somewhere around there? You did a movie. I think I remember this coming out with Jordan Peele, Us. What was your involvement on there? You weren't the primary composer, but what was your position? You were a part of that project.
Yes. Yeah. I worked with composer Michael Abels. Michael is just an amazing genius composer. His ideas are so out of the box. So I worked on his music team for Us and then a few other projects after that. It was a really interesting exposure to different levels of filmmaking. Us is a psychological thriller, bordering on horror, but it's got a lot of psychological elements to it. So Michael had very specific ways in which he wanted to tell the story musically. And that was a joy and like a high wire balancing act to work on. One of the most unique things about that project is the concept of picture lock was not really a concept ever enforced in that project, because Michael.
We know that feeling, don't we, Jake?
Man,
I think every filmmaker knows that feeling. Yes.
Yeah, but man, taken to an extreme though, like we would be filling a scene with music and figuring out what goes where, and then we'd get it back a few days later, and the edit itself, the picture edit, had completely changed shape, and sometimes in the middle of an action sequence, which made it extremely difficult. So suddenly you got pieces that were here that are moved over there and shortened and this and that, and then our job becomes, well, how do we now make a musical piece out of this that the orchestra can actually play coherently? Especially in action sequences, it can be tough. So we're dealing with a lot of unusual meters and crazy tempos, and just trying to make sense of how to tell this story musically while working on the team organically. So we're responding to the editor, the director, everybody's got opinions, and trying to deliver the score in a very short amount of time. So that was a unique challenge in its own way, but also really thrilling.
How did you like working with all the departments on a bigger film like that?
Likewise, thrilling and, at moments a little bit scary, but, I mainly worked directly through Michael. Michael really was the inception of all the ideas that were being used, and he was the chief communicator, with Jordan, with the other people. So my job was just to be in the room and figure out what needed to be done according to what Michael was going for, and then help him do that.
I'll throw this out there and then we can move on to another question real quick. So, David, what's your favorite time signature? Do you have one?
I'm kind of partial to 5/4 and 7/8, just because it's a little odd and it kind of keeps you on your toes and makes things a little more unexpected. Kind of harkening back to mentioning TikTok a few minutes ago. I like things that are unexpected, that grab your ear in a way that you weren't expecting them to. You guys have probably noticed, like, another trend you see on TikTok a lot is cover songs that people do really weird things to. Like they just play them double time or half time or something like that. And the net result is you hear something familiar and yet it's kind of weird in an unexpected way. And I like doing that with music in general. Like, if I'm just going to play a really basic chord pattern, you're going to be bored after a couple seconds. But what can I do with it to make it interesting and capture your ear? This is more effective in comedy and action because the pace is typically faster. In drama, it's more drawn out generally. But yeah, I love catching the ear with unexpected things, whether it's unexpected instruments or unexpected time signatures, because uneven time signatures just keep you on your toes because you can't settle into a steady groove. It's not divisible by two. So, everything in human existence is two. We got 2 feet, we walk, A, B, or that kind of thing. And when you got 5'4" or 7'8", suddenly you can't walk that beat anymore. It's uneven. So
right.
I like doing weird stuff like that. Sometimes I'm the only one that notices.
Really interesting. And that kind of goes back, I think, to the very small details and the psychological components when you're trying to draw emotions out of an audience.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So you work with Jordan Peele, which seemed like an awesome opportunity, and the amazing composer Michael. And then you go from there to what, Netflix? I think it's See You Yesterday.
See You Yesterday. That was another project with Michael.
Okay.
Similar, that completely different. That was like a sci-fi, surreal sci-fi flick. It was really fun to work on. I mean, I love swapping genres because it keeps life interesting. That was the other thing about moving to LA, is that every day I just got to work on something different, something interesting, a different style, a different genre. So See You Yesterday was like sci-fi. We also did, I helped him with HBO's Alan v. Pharaoh, which that's a drama. That's its own thing. A very different kind of creepy storytelling.
David, what would you say your favorite genre is? What gets you the most excited?
Gosh. My first gut reaction to your question is I love writing drama because I love doing large, expansive music. But the truth is just about anything. In fact, I mean, that's really one of the challenges of filmmaking, is every genre, every story, every project is a little bit different. And sometimes we can even superimpose different musical genres in a place that maybe they weren't expected to make them come alive. So I like the variety of things. I mean, I love writing comedy. I love writing action music. They've all got their own challenges. I don't have any one. I don't feel like I'm born here to write my music. I feel like I'm born to write whatever music the project needs at any given time. So I almost shy away from answering the question because I'll write whatever's needed for any project.
All right, David. So we're going from Jordan Peele, Netflix, and then we're transitioning over to Blakely, our documentary that was, had tons of money, multi-million dollars, and
forward, march! Front center!
I know it's tough, to work with such a big budget, but no, in all honesty, man, it was a great opportunity. Most of the time when we were on the same project, it was me as an actor. Now it was finally me as a director. And man, I had such a blast kind of learning, collaborating with you on that process. But we worked through finding the themes of what we wanted to, and I'll let you elaborate honestly on this more than me, but we kind of wanted to modernize it, right? We found the themes throughout what we wanted to use. And then we also, I think you also went through kind of more of a talking points on like how we can use that into the trailer as well. So we kind of used both components, and I'm happy to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, we did. That was a really great way to work, doing both the score and the trailer for it. Kind of what you said, it is a historical drama reenactment thing, but we also didn't want it to feel too old school, too traditional. We wanted it to feel like a modern thing, which I think mirrors the way you shot it, which is really important because the cinematography is just gorgeous on it, and so is the acting and all the period stuff. So when we see that on the screen, do we want it to feel like it was back then, or do we want to feel like a modern creation? And we together talked about, hey, let's go more in a bit of a modern direction. So there were some orchestral elements, but they were used in more modern ways rather than more traditional ways. And then there were some synth elements too that gave it that kind of a feel. If you would like, I'm happy to kind of show you a little bit on my screen. You want me to flip around and show you that?
Absolutely.
Let's do it. So this is what my working screen looks like. I use a program called Digital Performer, which is a digital audio workstation. It lets me record audio and MIDI, and if I need to, sync it to picture, which is what I'm doing today as I worked my way through this trailer here. It has a whole bunch of orchestra, like tremolo strings, tremolo brass, that kind of stuff. And then all of my drums are in red. A few different kind. I use like a military snare at times here to get that flavor because this is military, right? Some extra cellos. All my basses are in orange, and you can see I've got a couple different layers of basses going on. Oh, that was my sub bass drop that I just dropped in there because I think that it's more of a modern feel on it, and a low brass impact. Then some additional sound effects, violin risers, that kind of stuff.
All right, so David, that was really awesome to see, and I'm curious, how many instruments do you play, and how many instruments do you play that you're confident to play on the scores that you create? What are we looking at here? I know you said you did classical piano, but how big is this list?
It's not the quantity, it's the quality. That old thing. I mean, piano is my main instrument, so I play that most of all. I do play many other instruments as hobbies or at a lower level, but a lot of what film scoring requires is not necessarily virtuosity. Like, I'm not a world-renowned guitarist, but I can pull a guitar off the wall and I can play chords. And, sometimes all a score needs is bring. I can do that. Same with certain wind or brass instruments, I can play them. Also, a lot of music that is recorded in the computer, like I was showing, it is keyboard based. Like, I can make my keyboard trigger a violin or a synth or a this or a that. So, I mean, being a keyboardist gives me a lot of flexibility with that. But I have recorded like dozens of different instruments over different scores. It's kind of like whatever the project needs, and I'll figure out a way to do it. You can't see it, but behind the camera, I have my old high school marching band trumpet mounted on the wall. I don't play trumpet anymore. My chops are weak, but if I needed to use them in the context of a session, and I do this fairly often, like I can do it with the power of editing. So, I'm not a professional trumpeter where every take is just going to be perfect, but I can do 10 takes or 20 takes until I get what I want, and then I'll just splice it together. So that's where I say, virtuosity is not always what's needed. If I was recording Star Wars, it's time to call a professional trumpet player. But for a lot of routine film score needs, I can make do with stuff. I also have a pretty large network of musician friends I can call. Everyone is pretty savvy at remote recording nowadays. So if I need something esoteric or something that's beyond my own capabilities, it's pretty easy to get that quickly. And,
So David, we're kind of talking a little bit about, when we worked together on Blakely, I'm a huge fan of electronic, as you know, and we tried not to go too far on the electronic side and the synth side, but we also wanted to stay a little bit on the traditional side. What can you tell me, like, how do you find a balance between electronic and more, on the orchestral side?
Whatever the project needs. A lot of times with modern orchestral scores, there are some hybrid elements, even if they're subtle, even if it's just a thicker synth bass to make it feel more beefy than a real orchestra would sound in real life, or various synth elements. It really depends what the project calls for. But, at this point, we live in a very hybrid world. There is absolutely nothing wrong with pairing traditional instruments and modern instruments. And it's all artistry and figuring out how to make them fit together. But I love working with both. And these are tools in our toolbox that we use. And sometimes we call on that tool, sometimes we call on that tool. And sometimes we just kind of feel it out and see what the project needs.
All right. So David, I think this has been an exciting year for you. You have recently been nominated for a Grammy this year, man. Tell us about that.
Yeah, thanks. That was a fantastic project in a completely different field. That was musical theater album. An old friend of mine, Aaron Lazar, I actually went to high school with him. He and I were making music from the time we were, little kids. And he's a lifelong friend of mine, a very accomplished Broadway actor and singer. And he has unfortunately been diagnosed with ALS. And so he's facing the battle of his life, but he has really been inspiring a lot of people with his holistic outlook on healing from that disease. One thing he did, he was like, I really want to do something to rally the community and to provide hope and inspiration. One of his signature songs in his own career was The Impossible Dream from Man of La Mancha. And he was like, I really want to do this. So he called every friend he had in the business and we started making a record together. And he called me early on and said, hey, do you want to be involved in this? And I was like, you couldn't keep me away with a 10-foot pole.
I know we're at the melody here on this part.
It was a several-month process of making that album, but I produced it along with Kit Wakely, Patrick Conlon, Christina Giacona, and we kind of followed this saga of coordinating dozens and dozens of contributors to the album, people Aaron would duet with. It culminated in a big We Are the World style group vocal session in New York, and along the way we just got to work with so many incredible people. I played on the Josh Groban track when Josh and Aaron duetted on Sting's Let Your Soul Be Your Pilot. And yeah, the list is too long to name here, but just so many incredible talents who all devoted their time for this cause. And the record did really well. We're all extremely proud of it. And it made it all the way to the final stage of the Grammys. We were up for Best Traditional Pop. And we didn't get it in the end. We lost it to my old college nemesis, Nora Jones. I went to college with Nora, so this is kind of like this is a personal thing, but she's wonderful. But we were all incredibly honored to get that far. And, in the context of our previous conversation, there's a lot of that. You're just picking the right tool out of the toolbox for the moment you're in. Because this project, even though it wasn't to picture specifically, was all about painting that picture that Aaron wanted to communicate through inspiring people. A lot of it was through song choices. A lot of it was through voice, and then figuring out how to put the beds around that and how to arrange that music so that it could showcase all those things. So it's a huge honor to be a part of. We were incredibly excited to get as far as we did.
Man, that's awesome.
So cool.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
And with that, that's a great way to end. Thanks again for coming on the podcast, man.
My pleasure. It's such a pleasure to talk to filmmakers like you, because we get to shoot the breeze about how this stuff is actually done. And yeah, anytime. Happy to talk.
Hey guys, thanks for checking out our podcast. To watch more videos like this, subscribe to our channel. We're featuring many filmmaking guests like writers, producers, directors, and actors. You can also stream this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, and Amazon Music if you're on the go. We'll see you in the next one.